Amen. Makhanda masivulayo kuleko abawethu sekhaya ezulwini ise uNkosi yethu Jesu namanje Nkosi sisumela phambi kobuso bakho ngegama laJesu nangobuhle bakho. Oh Lord, claiming the promises that is found in the book of Matthew. Lord, khona Nkosi ababili nabathathu abahlangene Nkosi ngegama lakho. Wena Nkosi uyakuba nawe. Nkosi ayikho into esiyidingayo kakhulu lo mhlaba wesikhathi esiphila kuso, more than to know Nkosi that you are with us. Namanje soqalisa ke Nkosi ukufunda izwi lakho sikhuthazane kumhlanganyelo wethu Nkosi yangoLwesithathu. We pray that you may help us to understand the things esifundayo bese zibonakala Nkosi siyiphila nesikhathi ukuphila kwethu kukhombisa Nkosi isikhathi esiphila kuso. Senzele umusa ke Nkosi nangaphezulu ukucela kwethu If you would remember, we studied before lesson last week. We were looking at the experience of Israel, with what led them to reject the Messiah. And the most prophet, we are seeing any experience that typifies the end of the times as well for Israel is the experience that Israel ephume eGibhithe eya eCanaan. Kakhulu at the border of Jordan, at the border of Canaan, at Jordan, what happened before we were there in Jordan? The idolatry that took place there, sexual immorality, unfaithful to uNkulunkulu. So as long as they were recorded for us, and they also zizinkomba noma zifanekisa into ezokwenzeka kumaKristu aclaim ukuhamba noNkulunkulu ngokuqiniso kuIsrael kamoya, into ezokwenzeka kuyena andukuba uJesu abuye ukuhlangana uNkulunkulu inhloso yakhe ukuthi singadingi bani siqhuqumezelane to put more weight kwizinto ezi-eternal and less weight kwizinto ezi-temporary. Namhlanje sibuka the healing wound and ama-events enzakalayo around the healing of the wound. If umfundi wesiprofetho asikho isiprofetho engabe sifocuse kuso njengabafundi besiprofetho njengebandla futhi njengesiprofetho sa Revelation chapter 13 ne-fulfillment yakhona. Uma uyifunda lezi prophet uyifunda together no Revelation chapter 16, uyifunda together no Revelation chapter 17 and Revelation chapter 18, ne-process eyenziwa yingelosi ka Revelation chapter 7 okusila abantwana bakaNkulunkulu, ngoba bonke abantu abangenayo isili kaNkulunkulu they will automatically receive the seal of God. In fact, period esiphila kuyona manje, it's either you are being prepared to receive isil kaNkulunkulu or you are being prepared to receive the mark of the beast. But the crisis esesiyifundile that is before us ukuthi there will be an enforcement of his Sunday worship, which is what Revelation chapter 13 speaks about. So namhlanje sokuyele emuva siyofocusa kakhulu uverse 1, 2 and 3. Khona into ebalekile evela ngesilo lesi esiqhamuka emanzini amaningi noma olwandle. Lithi iBhayibheli, it was once wounded but it will be healed. So we want to understand the process ye healing of this beast noma lesi silo esisithola Revelation chapter 13. Asemfundeni ke Revelation chapter 13 sifunda from verse 1, 2 and 3. Angase ngibona isilo sikhuphuka ulwandle sinezimpondo eziyishumi namakhanda ayisikhombisa, nasezimpondweni aso kukhona amagama enhlanga. Isilo engasibonayo sifana nengwe, nezinyawo zaso zinjengezebhere, nomlomo waso wawunjengomlomo wengonyama. uDrago wasinika amandla akhe nesihlalo sakhe sokubusa nokubusa okukhulu. Elinye lamakhanda aso kungathi lalidebezwe okokufa, kepha ingozi yaso yokufa yalashwa. Umhlaba wonke walandela isilo umangala. Mawufunda isiNgisi ethi, ngifunda in the King James, and I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a great beast arise of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon the heads the name of blasphemy. Igama emvula uqaphele kuthiwa upon his head the name of blasphemy was there. Igama emvula uqaphele izulu lithi ublasphemy inhlamba. Mawufunda uJohn bathi ukuhlambalaza. Verse 2 athi, and the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his head as it were wounded to death, and its deadly wound was healed, and the whole world wondered after the beast. And the whole world wondered after the beast. Khona izinto eziwu-2 enkulu iqaphele. 1, lesisilo kuthiwa sinamagama ani enhlamba. Igama lesingisi abalisebenzisile it blasphemy. Okwesibili, lesisilo sake saba nengozi, kodwa uJohn mayesibona la uthi lesisilo sizonjani ingozi yaso izophola. Sifuna ukwazi ukuthi le ngozi isho ukuthini, ukuphola kwayo kusho ukuthini, le ngozi sabekwa nini lesisilo, amagama enhlamba noma amagama of blasphemy asho ukuthini. Why? Because uJohn mayebona yonke lento yenzeka, usebone esinye isilo siphuma kuphi emhlabeni kuverse 11. And lesi silo esiphuma emhlabeni senza abantu bekhonze isilo sokuqala. Ngamanye amazwi mase sibona isilo sesibili siphoqa ukuthi abantu bekhonze isilo sokuqala, kusho ukuthi lesi silo sokuqala sesinawo amandla. And inqaba lakho nasenjani selipholile, siyazi ukuthi umuntu mayekadelwa bese banenxeba yini aphila yona amandla. Ngamanye amazwi isiprofeti sisitshela ukuthi lesi silo besinamandla once upon a time, sathola inxeba. Ngamanye amazwi inxeba lisho ukuthi amandla asenjani, asephelile. Ngamanye amazwi ukuphulukiswa kwalesi silo inxeba laso kusho ukuthi amandla asasenjani, ayabuya. Okay, asiqhubeke no blasphemy. Simbuka ukuthi makuthiwa lesi silo sinamagama enhlamba. Mawuqhubeka even ku Revelation uya ku verse 6, kuthiwa and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So verse 6 uyasicacisela ukuthi lesi silo si blasphema nje, asinawo amagama eblasphemy ekhanda laso kuphela, but kuthiwa savula umlomo waso ukuhlambalaza uNkulunkulu, ukuhlambalaza igama lakhe nethabanakele lakhe nabo abahlezi ezulwini. So we see ukuthi this beast seems to be against God, simelene noNkulunkulu. And as you go down ufunda ngaso lesisilo, to even simelene noNkulunkulu nabangcwele bakaNkulunkulu, sebashushisa bonke abangasikhonzi sona isilo banjani, bayashushiswa noma bebhubhiswa. Asambeni ke sithole iBhayibheli uma likhuluma ngeblasphemy noma ngokuhlambalaza noma ngamagama enhlamba. Lokho kusuke kusho ukuthini ukuze sikwazi ukusibona ukuthi siphi lesi silo okukhulunywa ngaso. Siya kuJohn chapter 10, uJohn chapter 10 sifunda uverse 3. Mhlawumbe siqale uverse 30 sehle nayo ukuze siqonde ukuthi le ndaba ifika kanjani. Uthi uJesu, mina noBaba simunye. AbaJuda base bebuye bethatha amatshe ukuba bamkhande. uJesu waphendula wathi, nginitshelile imisebenzi eminingi emihle evela kuBaba. Yimuphi umsebenzi kulena eningikhandela yona na? Miningi imisebenzi ngimtshelile yona evela kuBaba. Njoba nithatha amatshe manje, imuphi eningikhandela wona ngamatshe? Baphendula AbaJuda bathi, asikukhandi ngenxa yomsebenzi omuhle, kepha ngenxa yokuhlambalaza ngokuba wena ungumuntu uzenza uNkulunkulu. Mawufunda elesingisi lithi uverse 33, the Jews answered him, it is not for a good work that we are going to stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself God. Ngamanye amazwi iBhayibheli lisitshela ukuthi umuntu ethi ewumuntu ebe yena ethi uNkulunkulu, lokho eBhayibhelini amaJuda acknowledge as blasphemy, as inhlamba. Akekho umuntu esesiqweni somuntu bese ethi yena ulingana noma uNkulunkulu. So when Jesus ethi kuverse 30, mina noBaba simunye, athi amaJuda uthi winhlamba, uyahlambalaza. So i-definition yokuqala lesiyithola eBhayibhelini echaza ukuthi usho ukuthini umuntu makuthiwa eBhayibhelini unjani uyahlambalaza noma uthuka inhlamba makusetshenziswa legama lethi blasphemy. Umuntu osuke ezenza ubani? uNkulunkulu. Asambeni kuLuke chapter 5. uLuke chapter 5 ungifundela uverse 21. Ungifundela uverse 21.
And the scribes and the Pharisees began to reason, saying, who is this that speaketh blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?
Bathi ubani lo othi okhuluma ini inhlamba? Bathi ukhuluma inhlamba ngobani?
He claims to forgive sins.
Ngoba uthi uyakwazi ukuxolela ini izono. Ngamanye amazwi, the second definition esiyithole eBhayibhelini of ukusebenza lapho esithola khona igama lokuhlambalaza noma lokuhlambalaza ngokutheni Revelation inhlamba, ukuhlambalaza noma inhlamba. Sithola amaJuda bathi nangu lo ehlambalaza ethi uyakwazi ukuxolela izono. Who can forgive sin except who? Except God. Ubani okwazi ukuxolela izono ngaphandle kwabani? Ngaphandle kwaNkulunkulu. Ngaphandle kwaNkulunkulu. In other words, there are two definitions esithola eBhayibhelini makuthiwa umuntu uyahlambalaza. Usuke ethi yena uNkulunkulu noma uyakwazi ukuxolela ini? Izono. Now, because we want to identify lesi silo okukhulunywa ngaso kuRevelation 13, siyanikwa ama-characteristics aso. Kodwa sitshelwa ukuthi siwubani. In other words, masibuka ama-characteristics sikwazi ukusikhomba ukuthi isilo ekukhulunywa ngaso lana isiphi. Uyamkhumbula uJesu ethi nizobazi ngani ngezithelo zabo mayikhuluma ngabafundi bakhe. Athi abafundi bami no, nizobazi ngezithelo zabo. Nalapho futhi uJesu unika i-description of this beast. And siyazi masifunda uDaniel chapter 7 verse 17 kuthiwa i-beast noma isilo inkosi noma amakhosi omhlaba noma imbuso, the kingdom. Mawufunda uverse 23. So we already know ukuthi i-kingdom ethile, kodwa fanele sikwazi ukuyi-identify this kingdom. Masiya kuDaniel 7 sithola i-kingdom yokuqala okukhulunywa ngayo kuDaniel 7 kuthiwa ifana nani? Nengonyama. Kuba i-kingdom yesibili okwakuthiwa ifana nani? Ne-leopard nengwe. Kube i-kingdom yesithathu eyesibili kwakuthiwa ifana ne-bear kuDaniel chapter 7. Eyesithathu kwakuthiwa ifana nani? Nengwe. Kube yesine okwakuthiwa ayichazeki. Okwakuthiwa nje it's a beast engachazeki nokuchazeka. uJohn mayibona lesi silo esiphuma emanzini, sisithola isilo esiphuma emanzini sinawo wonke lama characteristics. Thola sinomlomo onjengewengwe. Anganisho njalo verse 2. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. Thola isilo ngasibona sasifana nengwe. Umlomo wa inyawo zaso isifana nezebhere. Kuthiwa umlomo waso ufana nowani? Nowengwe. In other words, isilo esisitholayo kuRevelation 13 sinama-characteristics of all the kingdoms that we find kuDaniel chapter 7. And we know ukuthi i-kingdom yokuqala okukhulunywa ngayo kuDaniel chapter 7 noDaniel chapter 2 kwakuyini? KwakuyiBabylon. I-kingdom eyakhonkarisha iBabylon according to Daniel chapter 5, mawufunda iverse yokugcina, I think verse 31, was the Medo and Persia. I-kingdom eyakhonkarisha iMedo and Persia, mawufunda Daniel chapter 8, it was Greece. And in history, may I tell you what i-kingdom eyakhonkarisha Greece was the Roman Empire. uJesu efika ngomhlaba wokuqala, the kingdom that was ruling was the kingdom of the Romans. Ingakho amasosha amaRoma esebenzisana nabapriest bakwa-Israyeli ababethela uJesu. In other words, isiprofeso saDaniel chapter 2 and 7 efika uJesu wokuqala was already sisemlenzeni ngokwestate uDaniel asibona. And actually this kingdom will be divided into 10. Ilapho khona ibandla lamaRoma eqhamuka khona as a papal system, because it was a Roman Empire, and from the Roman Empire kunamaKrestu a convert to Constantine to become a Christian. Then the Roman Empire begins to assume a posture to be a Christian kingdom. And out of the Roman Empire assuming to become a Christian kingdom came among that kingdom the Roman Catholic papacy. Then we find the papal Rome coming out of the pagan Rome. We will get to that history because it's a folder. But we want to identify this beast in the context of his prophet Daniel. Ama-characteristics esiwatholayo kuRevelation 13 ayafana nama-characteristics atholakala kuDaniel chapter 7. Masifunda this article yangoNovember 21, 2016. Ithi uma uyifunda izoyenza ibe clear ukuze siyibone nayo. Ithi Pope Francis allows priests to forgive abortion. And there are tons and tons of articles in, this is BBC News, the international, it's not like we took it from a fake news website. It's an official recording of the Pope assuming to have powers. Now, the Pope, ever since there was the Pope on this world, they have always assumed the authority and the power to be able to forgive his own. And little Bible, any man or assume the power of his own, this is what the Bible identifies as a blasphemy. This is a recent article. So the Catholic Church forgives sins of those stricken by coronavirus. Just yesterday, with the church saying no, if in a corona, remember the article, the article it said, could coronavirus be a judgment from who? From God. So if the coronavirus is judgment from God, so anyone who I told, because of his own. Remember, umazenzeka zonke lezi zinhlekelele zizogcine zithi lezi izinto zenzeka ngoba siphumile kubani kuNkulunkulu asibuyeleli kuNkulunkulu ukuze sixolelwe ini izono. That is why uthola ama-articles anje aleli coronavirus with God's judgment, and the church comes and say siyakwazi ukuxolela abantu who have contracted this disease. And this is, we know even in a movie, when people would come and bow down before all Pope or all Father and begin to confess their sins, as you see this child, priest I did this and I did that, and people believe after heaven, why? It assumed with our priest Rome, abanikeze amandla uPope kanye naye uPope bayakwazi ukuxolela izono. So we are able to identify at least one Christian church emhlabeni elithi lona liyakwazi ukuxolela izono. Not only is it a Christian church, if Vatican is a kingdom in Rome, and Pope is sitting as a state person in the affairs of the Vatican. In the affairs of the Vatican. So not only is the Catholic Church a church, but also it is a kingdom in the Vatican City. 2, sifundile ukuthi not only is it blasphemy umuntu othi uyakwazi ukuxolela izono, kodwa blasphemy umuntu futhi othi yena ulingana noNkulunkulu noma uNkulunkulu ebe ewubani ebe umuntu. And this we find from Pope Louis the 11th. Out of his mouth he said this in 1922. On April 29, 1922, in the Vatican throne room, a throng of cardinals, bishops, priests, nuns, boys and girls were all fallen on their knees in reverence to one before them, where they addressed from the throne of Pope Pius XI, who said, "You know that I am the Holy Father, the representative of God on earth, the vicar of Christ, which means I am God on earth." Even if you read the current documents as a Vatican, they are continuously acknowledging Pope as the vicar of Christ or the representative of God or the God on earth. Again, Pope even Pope Louis, we hold upon this earth the place of God on earth. This was 1894. I think this is the first one who actually uttered those words. Which we hold the place of God on this earth. And every successor of popes are also claiming the very same utterances ukuthi they are the custodians of God emhlabeni. That is why you see Pope Francis sitting in this priestly chair or throne, and beside him are two cherubims. Where do we find this depiction in the Bible? In the sanctuary, and there were two cherubims that were covering the Shekinah glory, and the Shekinah glory was where God sat. And the two covering cherubs, even now Lucifer was one of the covering cherubs, the son of the morning. And most prophet Lucifer and Jesus were those covering cherubs who were covering the throne of God. And it depicts being a God who is encircled by these two cherubims. And this is the system of the Catholic, as they believe they are the mother church of all the churches, and they represent God, and they are ibandla laNkulunkulu emhlabeni. Mawufunda Psalms 8 verse 1 uthi, give ear, O Israel, give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you that lead Joseph like a flock, you that dwell between the what? The cherubim shine forth. So ubani odwella between the cherubims according to the Bible? uNkulunkulu, it is God himself. Now Pope is claiming to be the God on earth. He also then dwells within the cherubims emhlabeni to continue his claim to be uNkulunkulu. So we can begin to be able to identify as sinikezwa ama-characteristics ku-Revelation chapter 13 ukuthi siphi lesi silo. Verse 3 athi, and the wound was healed. Inxeba lanjani? Laphola. Umhlaba wonke walandela ini? Walandela isilo. Now sifuna ukubona ukuthi leli nxeba maliphola kusho ukuthini. Lize liphole nje lalidebezwe yini, because uJohn lethu ibona in vision yenzeka, and maliphola thina fayisazi sikwazi ukusichaza isiprofeto ukuthi what does these things mean. Sifunda article on March 6, 2017. You will understand ukuthi in 2017 it was a great celebration of the Reformation. Reformation was celebrating 500 years of Reformation. You need to go study this thing. It's very, very interesting in what happened around this time. The Protestant churches, yes, ma'am. Was it 2015? I think it was 2015, yeah. Between 2015 and 2017. They were celebrating the 500 years of Reformation in Uti. After they separated from the Church of Rome, so the Protestants were celebrating that 500 years. But what is interesting is that 500 years of Reformation, the Protestant churches were celebrating with the Roman Catholic Church. They were celebrating their protesting with the Catholic Church. And the Pope was attending the ceremonies of the Lutheran churches, the Baptists. They were attending the ceremonies of them celebrating being separated from the Catholic Church. And you will read in this article, you will get a hint with what is the wound. Is prophet because they acknowledge the Reformation themselves as the wound. Healing the Reformation what? Wounds. In other words, in Reformation, no matter Protestant in the Catholic Church caused the wound in the church. That's the first wound that you must understand. 500 years have passed since the Reformation rippled through the church, causing painful division and sparring changes. Sadly, even more divisions have occurred in that period, but the ecclesial and cultural landscape today is much different than it was then. And we must respond to Christ's prayer that we may all be one by speaking together about our faith, inspired by His Word and the Holy Spirit. They acknowledged the Reformation rippled the church and caused what? Division. But ithiwa manje isikhathi sesiphila kusona sesishintshile, asisafani nalesiyana. Kufanele sibuyisane manje sibe yi-one njengoba uKristu alithandazela ibandla ukuthi malibe njani, malibe munye. But uJesu akazehle sibe munye, not in truth. Asibe munye just because sifuna ukuba munye as a Christian church, but uthi asibe one in what? In truth, and one in one accord. Mawuqhubeka ufunde article ithi, this is necessary. This necessity reminds me of Pope Francis' passage in Evangelii Grandium, where he observed that the credibility of the Christian message would be much greater if Christians would overcome their divisions. Uthi Pope Francis nobalayo ukuthi Pope Francis uthi Pope Francis ukuthi uthe ama-Christians awanayo i-credibility so long as they are divided. Ama-Christians are only credible when they are what? When they are united. And the Pope is doing everything he can to unite the Christian church, even though we don't agree doctrinally. The church would realize the fullness of the Catholicity proper to her in those of her children. Now she begins to understand, she begins to separate. Ukuthi Catholicity is her. It's the mother. They said, and those of her children. In other words, they are acknowledging the church as the mother, and they are acknowledging the other churches as the children of the mother. We are keep on having the power outage. You see, Pazamisa. I think we have seen the identification of the beast according to Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13 identifies the same system that was identified by Daniel in chapter 4. It is the Roman Empire, and out of the Roman Empire came the Roman Catholic Church or the papacy. Now the following slides we're going to show the events that are taking place in Emhlabeni are all preparing us to have the world go back in worshipping under the Roman Catholic system. All the conditions of the world are being prepared. Whether sikhuluma nge-Great Reset ebesizokhuluma ngayo, noma sikhuluma nge-financial crisis, all the conditions in the world are looking into making the world follow after the beast. Verse 3 is very important in this prophecy. Why? Ngoba it, and I saw all the world wandered after the beast. Verse 3, until all the world wandered after the beast. Now, for the whole world to wander after the beast, the whole world, Mambiela, must be subjected to a particular system. And if you don't form part of that particular system, we will read Revelation chapter 13 verse 15 to 17. Revelation 13 verse 15 to 17.
Verse 15.
Yeah.
Sangiwa futhi ukuba siwuphe umfanekiso wesilo umoya. Ukuze umfanekiso wesilo ukhulume, senze futhi ukuba bonke abangakhuleki umfanekiso wesilo babulawe.
Yeah.
Senza futhi ukuba bonke abancane nabakhulu,
Yeah.
nabacephile nabampofu,
Yes.
nabakhululekileyo nabayizigqila,
Yes.
bazibeke uphawu esandleni sabo
Yeah.
sokunene noma eluzini labo. Ukuba ngabikho ongathenga nokuba athengise,
Yeah.
uma engenalo uphawu, igama lesilo noma isibalo segama laso.
Okay? Khambe singama lapho. Asambe ku Revelation chapter 18. Sifunde nje verse 3. Lithi iBhayibheli, and all the nations have drunk of her wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Remember that the Catholic Church acknowledges the article ebesiyifunda ukuthi she is her and her children. Lo bebhala uthena her and her what? And her children. Siyakhumbula la? So, and the church could realize the fullness of Catholicity proper to her and her what? And her children. So the whole world must understand properly the position of her as a church and also of her children. Usethi la mapunda ngaleli bandla that is fallen, which is Babylon. Utu Revelation, and all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So how many people is her, this her church? How many relationships does she have? Men are together. But how are these relationships identified kanjani lama relationship? Imaphi ama-group identified ngawo? Amakhosi omhlaba, nani futhi? Nama-merchants, the businesses, the traders. So in other words, the church with businesses, the church with the kings of the world, which are the leaders of the world, the governments of the world. For the whole world to wander after the beast according to Isabel taking Nambier, the church must have relationships with the government, and the church must have relationships with the businesses. So part of the wound healing is having the Protestant churches going back to where? To Rome. Does it make sense? If ingozi yadalwa ukuthi kube le reformation, kube nabazalwane abaphumayo eCatholic, then ukuphulukiswa kwengozi kusho ukuthi now the whole world is wandering after the same beast, and that means the Protestant churches are going back by doctrine and practice back to Rome, back to Egypt, as Calvin or John Knox or Martin Luther ran away from the Catholic Church. Today, the Catholic Church is calling Martin Luther a fanatic. The same way it did then, before them excommunicate. Now let's listen to this man. This man is late, but he was one of the leading evangelicals in America, together with a huge following of bishops. And they were leading the Reformation and the Protestant back to Rome. And we listen to him now.
We know that the first 1,000 years there was one church, it was called the Catholic Church. And the word Catholic means universal, it doesn't mean Roman. Catholic means, if you're born again, raise your hand if you're born again. You're a Catholic. Take back, redeem what belongs to you. We are Catholics.
But I think it's Tommy Palmer. What he's basically saying in this video, you'll see as Mxolisi is saying that. He's saying there was one church in this world, and that church was the Catholic Church. Before the split, there was one church. And Catholic means universal, it does not mean Roman, he says that. Basically, everyone who came out of the Roman Catholic Church, whether you're Baptist or Lutheran or whatever, we are all Catholics. If you are born again, we are all Catholics. You may be there and there and there, but we are all Catholics because that is where we came from. And as a result, that is why the Catholic Church is acknowledging every other church as her children. Because false history says the first church was the Catholic Church. But the Catholic Church was the first church, more colorway history, Yama Dark Ages. Because they destroyed everything into a Christ. And they emerged as the only church that existed. They destroyed everything before. But Unkulunkulu has always preserved in Tsali, even our wild dancers during that time, were preserved by God, keeping the Sabbath because they were against the system. And there is no church in the world that has ever killed more people than the Catholic Church during the Dark Ages. This is the time that you calculate from 588 to 1798. And in between here, the first wound was created around the 1517 when Martin Luther began a reformation in Rome. So we have the first beginning of the wound in 1517 when Martin Luther began a reformation. But the Catholic Church still had power because it continued to persecute Christians even after Martin Luther, because he himself was persecuted by the very church. It still had control over our governments and Europe. All the kings and the queens of the world were controlled by the Catholic Church. The education system, our businesses or not, everything during this time was controlled by the church. So though a reformation yakala, but amandla, every power, economic power, secular power, authority power was still with the Catholic Church until 1798. When the French Revolution, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, went to the Vatican, took the Pope, went back to France, imprisoned the Pope of that time, and he died in prison under the French Revolution. Because they said we no longer want to be ruled by the Christian Church. And then they established the secular authority. They said we are done with papal governance, where they would send their priests and their cardinals to look over the affairs of our government. And in 1798, the deadly fatal wound was entrenched in the Roman Catholic system. And it lost all its power, it lost its influence in governments, it lost its influence over kings. Now, for the Catholic Church to be healed again, it must both gain power in the religious circles and gain power in the civil circles. We studied and saw ukuthi Joe Biden gave his allegiance to Pope Francis even before he took office. What when I will work with this government? What if I will work with this government? You will see next week as we continue the same subject, ukuthi all the reformers, or John or Calvin, or John Knox, or Martin Luther King, or Martin Luther, identified the beast of Revelation 13 as none other than the Catholic Church and the papal system. So young friends is leading us to a situation where we won't be able to buy and sell unless we have the mark of the beast. You will see as we start about the Great Reset. You will see as we start about the financial crisis. Ukuthi ukuze kube nesystem mhlawumbe sasiphila kuso isikhathi lapho na esingakwazi ukuthenga noma ukuthengisa masingenalo uphawu lesilo. Umbuzo wami uthi uyakwazi ukuyothenga namhlanje esitolo not necessarily without the mask but without sikhona lesitolo namhlanje esinqabela abantu bathenge kuso ngenxa yokuthi abanalo uphawu lesilo. Asikho. Ngamanye amazwi uphawu lesilo manje akakabi njalo. Alakabi khona. Uphawu lesilo lizoba khona mase kubonakala mase kwenzakala ini emhlabeni. Mase kuthiwa awukwazi ukuthenga ngaphandle kwayo. Are we together? In other words, ukuze ke wonke umhlaba ulandele isilo, fanele ku-create ama-conditions emhlabeni azoforce abantu ukuthi kube njalo. Are we together? In other words, umnotho manje esiphila ngaphansi kwawo akuwona lo mnotho othi angikwazi ukuthenga ngaphandle kophawu lesilo. So ukuze umhlaba ulandele isilo, fanele ku-create umnotho ozosiphoqa ukuthi singakwazi ukuthenga ngaphandle kwayo. Umbuzo uthi makuwukuthi asakabi kulo mnotho manje, yini ekufanele yenzeke kulo mnotho wamanje ukuze kube nalowo mnotho? Fanele ususwe lo. Are we together, friends? Ngoba asakabi kuwona kuyabonakala ukuthi ngithenga ngemali, ngithenga nje nge-credit card akulona uphawu lesilo. And we've studied ukuthi uphawu lesilo yini. And asakafiki kuleso sikhathi. And siyabona leso sikhathi sihamba futhi nomnotho. Ngamanye amazwi uphawu lesilo or i-Sunday worship inokwenza futhi nomnotho. Athi yabo inokwenza nokuthenga ko-Shoprite, no-Edgars, no Spar. Athi yabona ukuthi ama-merchants of the world are also involved in this whole thing. Now the economy, the esikuyona manje must be destroyed first. Ukuze kufakwe i-economy entsha ezokwazi ukuthi bese yenza lento isiprofeti esikhuluma ngayo ukuthi wonke umhlaba uzophoqwa ukuthi ulandele isilo, and noma silandele isilo will not be able to buy or sell ngaphandle kokuthi abe nani, abe nophawu lesilo. Ingakho ngithena let's study about what this great reset is all about. We will continue next week. We will look at, because the great reset has to do with the economy, education, social affairs, and all these other things. Kube the financial crisis, but there's a big crash coming. So they must crash this economy for them to start the new economy. And they've already began Amakam reset. So which puts me now, as we look into the news and we study these things, we must know what young Indians is pushing us to one event. The mark of the beast. And the question is, are we prepared if that were to happen tomorrow, would you be able really not to be able to go and buy in the shops? Since in everything, every single day we are dependent in the shops, in our workplaces, in services, so as we meet, we are encouraging each other and showing each other we will continue to send each other articles so I'm full work at the night about 6:30. So we will do other readings before. So that next week must we create a reset. But what is this great reset? And no Revelation 13, verse 15 to 17. So as we look into these things, and as we go home, let's go complete the articles of the Great Reset. Follow what is happening in the world. Coronavirus in India. Sooner or later, our experience in South Africa will be the same as India. Because they are trying to create frustrating conditions as much as they can. They expedite all the processes about we must reset. Currently, Article Pope is splitting for all the third world countries to be forgiven their debt. What does that mean? Demands. If you do as I tell you. So as we study all these things and all these articles, think of one event in mind. It is pushing us to that event. And am I prepared for that event? And you will see as we continue emphasizing about this Sunday law, it's not just being prepared spiritually, I am spiritually strong. That's not the preparation. There is a physical preparation as well. Noah, the only preaching, was building the ark. Noah and Noah become faithful in preaching. I spent more time preaching and I didn't have much time building the ark. And because now our God will just see because I've been faithful in His work. No. Preach and build. So that when the ark comes, you are able to just go in. And when the rain comes, there will be no time for preaching. You also get them out of one. So as we are still in the cities, let's get places in the countryside. Begin to build. As the storm comes, you just go and hide. As much as it's not much hiding, it's just securing yourself among the process here Sunday law, because after Sunday law, there will be close of probation. They will even hunt you in the countryside where you will be, seeking to kill everyone. Let me not take much of our time, friends. Let's just think about these things. But us preparing the angels to be able to stand for this time. Amen. As our custom, maybe we'll just take 189. 89. Yeah, maybe silently we'll just have 2 minutes as individuals, just reflecting and having a communication with God regarding the time as we answer. I think then after 2 minutes, I'll ask Ubab Sabela to just also dedicate us to Nkulunkulu and in closing on the level. So just take one stanza, 89, Kumnandi Kulega, and you just have a 2 minutes of reflection and praying and just having a communion with God in our personal capacity. See, thandazele siyibeke kuNkulunkulu ukuthi ngempela isikhathi esiphila kusona sini. Then after that, sicela ke Baba Sabela asivalele in a closing prayer after we have